Hello, and thank you for your interest in my new book. Let me begin with this slide as an invitation to connect with me and follow me via any of these social media if you haven't already. And of course, if after listening to this overview of New Drugs Fair Prices you have any questions or you simply want to chat about the book, then please send me an email and I'll be delighted to set up a virtual cup of tea with you. So today I'm going to talk about my 8th book, New Drugs Fair Prices. I wrote this book to contribute towards solving a difficult and important problem, the cost of innovative new medicines. The pricing of new medicines is what social scientists call a wicked problem, one that's complex, messy and very resistant to solution. And it's also an important problem because if we don't solve it, then you, me and our loved ones will live sadder, shorter lives. In some ways, New Drugs Fair Prices is a love story. It's about a couple that have been married for a very long time. And like all married couples, they have always bickered a little. But lately, this bickering has become bitter and instead of working things out, they're getting more and more angry with each other. I'm seriously worried that they're going to break up. And that will be very, very sad because they really need each other. Talking about are the pharmaceutical industry and society. In particular, US society, because the US is the epicenter of pharmaceutical innovation. Years ago, this couple agreed to a marriage contract. Society agreed to pay for tax breaks and educated workers and to create a market through health insurance and to create temporary monopolies through patents and regulatory exclusivity. In return, the industry promised society it would provide the new effective medicines that society wants, and after making a reasonable ROI, to allow those medicines to commoditize as generics or biosimilars. This marriage has been good for both parties. The pharmaceutical industry has become big and successful, and society has benefited from many modern medicines, many of which are now very cheap. The relationship is unraveling. Society, with some justification, complains about price gouging and affordability. Opinion polls put the pharmaceutical industry on a level with the tobacco industry. The pharmaceutical industry, again with some justification, complains about the cost of innovation and the risks of failure. It says that price controls will mean less investment and fewer new drugs. They're just like a couple in the middle of a fight. Too much shouting, not enough listening. It is, as the French say, a dialogue of the deaf. I care deeply about this couple and I don't want them to break up because you, me and our loved ones need pharmaceutical innovation and we also need the economic benefits it provides. So I wrote New Drugs Fair Prices to be a sort of relationship counsellor, to get them to stop arguing about the things they dislike about each other and help them work on their relationship together. But as any relationship counsellor will tell you, the most important step in solving a problem is how you frame it. The traditional framing of pharmaceutical innovation is a machine. You've got money and science in one end and new drugs come out the other. You pull policy levers to increase these inputs and improve these outputs. You can see this paradigm implicitly or explicitly in most of the literature about pharmaceutical innovation. But very early in my research I realised that this was a poor metaphor because it really doesn't reflect the complexity of pharmaceutical innovation. As viewers of this presentation will understand, pharmaceutical innovation involves many different entities, from government to academia, from VCs to pharmaceutical companies, from payers to patients. And these different entities don't just interact with each other, they constantly adapt and change. And that's more or less the textbook definition of a complex adaptive system. And this leads to a neat historical twist. The best comparison to a modern pharmaceutical innovation is a physic garden, the gardens that apothecaries, or more usually their wives, used to grow their medicines. So, as a researcher, I approached pharmaceutical innovation from a complex adaptive systems perspective. And my goal was to understand how we might manage this garden as an apothecary might have managed his or hers, with the aim of growing the right medicines at the right price and keeping the garden alive in the long term. From this complex adaptive systems perspective, drugs and their prices are not caused by any single factor like investment or pricing or regulation. The drugs we get and the prices we pay for them are the result of all of those interactions and adaptations between all of the entities within the complex adaptive system. In the scientific jargon, new drugs and their prices are emergent properties of this complex pharmaceutical innovation ecosystem. So, taking this perspective, I set out to understand how that emergence works and how we might manage it like a good gardener would manage his garden. I didn't start my research from scratch, of course. I've worked in this industry since 1978 as a scientist, executive and academic, so I'm pretty familiar with how it works. And I didn't work alone. I built on a vast, varied literature about the many different aspects of pharmaceutical innovation and pricing. And then I went on to interview 80 expert informants who shared their knowledge generously with me and then criticised my conclusions in what's called the Delphi process. My goal was to understand how this ecosystem works and how we can get the best out of it. As you can imagine, I can't fit all of those findings into today's talk, so what follows is a brief overview. And if, as I hope, you want more detail, then either set up a call with me or read the book, or best of all, do both. My first finding was the most obvious. All of the different creatures in the ecosystem, from academic researchers to patient groups and everyone in between, all interact with each other. But importantly, they don't all interact equally and evenly. Their interactions cluster into 7 habitats, and each of those habitats has a specific role in the ecosystem. I'll explain these habitats in more detail in a moment. But it's important to understand that I'm not using the word ecosystem as a metaphor here. I'm not using it figuratively, I'm using it literally. And the key thing to understand is that an ecosystem only works if all of its habitats make their specific contribution to the ecosystem. If one habitat fails to deliver, the whole system suffers. This means that if we want affordable, innovative new medicines, then all 7 of these habitats must make their necessary contribution to the ecosystem. And if they don't, then either we won't get innovative drugs, or they won't be affordable, or the system will be economically unsustainable, or some combination of all 3. Predictably, this first but rather obvious finding led me to ask how well these 7 habitats work and how they can be managed. The first of these habitats is that occupied by basic researchers and government bodies like the NIH and philanthropists and others. The role of this habitat is to feed new knowledge into the ecosystem. But if we want those affordable, innovative new medicines, then this new knowledge must have 5 characteristics: its quantity, its relevance, its complementarity, its accessibility, and its predictivity. And the discovery habitat falls short on all of these requirements in numerous ways and for numerous reasons, which I describe at length in the book. The most salient weakness is that much of the discovery habitat's output has low predictivity, meaning that it's difficult and costly to translate into medicines, and many of those translations fail. One major primary reason for this is that translational science is not as well developed as we would want it to be. The NIH have identified a research agenda that would improve translational science, but much of the investment into translation conflates basic translational science, which has general applicability across all translations, with translational research, the translation of specific discoveries into specific medicines. As a result, the translation process is wasteful and expensive. In other words, the discovery habitat doesn't give the ecosystem what it needs to make sustainable, affordable medicines. The discovery habitat feeds the innovation habitat, which is the home of biotechs and pharma companies, but also government agencies such as the FDA and the Patent Office. The ecosystem needs this habitat to turn new knowledge into usable drugs and to bring them to market. And if we want to have this sustainable, affordable supply of innovative new medicines, the innovation habitat must do this in a particular way. It must do it effectively, meaning giving us the drugs we most need, and efficiently, meaning it must do so at reasonable cost, and sustainably, meaning it must generate a level of risk-adjusted return on investment that continues to attract investment. The innovation habitat falls short on these requirements in numerous ways for numerous reasons, again described in the book. It leaves many important clinical and economic needs unmet, and it addresses some unimportant needs, and those needs it does meet, it does so at high cost. There are many problems with the innovation habitat, but I'd stress two. First, it's driven by market forces in a market that is very far from perfect in the economist sense of that term. Second, it's very wasteful because of duplication of effort and lack of knowledge sharing. These and other failings mean that the innovation habitat doesn't fully contribute what the ecosystem needs, and this limits the ecosystem's ability to give us affordable, innovative medicines. The innovation habitat is enabled by the coalition habitat, which is the home of venture capitalists, pharma company venture funds, university technology transfer officers, and a vast number of lawyers, consultants, and service companies. To bring a drug to market requires money and a large, varied array of capabilities, and the coalition habitat's job is to assemble these. The ecosystem needs this assembly process to be effective, meaning that the aggregation of the right capabilities and resources in the right place, and efficient, meaning both the efficient allocation of capital at a risk-appropriate cost, but also that is done with relatively low transaction costs. As with the discovery and innovation habitats, the coalition habitat fails the ecosystem in various ways and for varied reasons. In particular, it delivers costly capital and has high internal transaction costs. Partly this is because of weaknesses in what the discovery habitat provides. But another part of the reason is that the biotech venture capital industry is quite an immature industry that is adapted to a particular high-risk, high-return environment. And this means that the coalition habitat can't perform its assembly task the way that the ecosystem needs it to if it is to produce affordable, innovative medicines. So now let's look at the demand side of the ecosystem, beginning with the value habitat, which is the home of health technology assessment bodies such as ISAR and NICE, but also academic health economists and those who pay for medicines. To give us what we want, the ecosystem needs the value habitat to assess the value of pharmaceutical innovations. But it needs those assessments to have real-world validity, be politically legitimate, be dynamic, and be communicable. At present, and despite lots of good work in this area, the value habitat can't yet meet those four demands of the ecosystem. Again, there are numerous interconnected reasons for this, but they include that we don't have the right information to work with, the methods we have are imperfect, and the assessments we make aren't fully utilised by payers. If we want affordable, innovative medicines, we need to be able to make much better value assessments, and we need to be able to use them. The value habitat is connected to the pricing habitat, which is inhabited by pharmaceutical companies, insurers, payers, and patients. The pricing habitat's function is to maintain the ecosystem's equilibrium by maintaining three kinds of balance. First, the balance of return on investment between manufacturers, intermediaries, and payers in line with their investments and their risks. Second, to balance the moral hazards so that none of the players is protected against the consequences of their actions. And third, to balance price confidentiality, which is necessary to some degree for commercial reasons, and against price transparency, which is necessary to some degree for public trust. As with the other habitats we've already mentioned, the pricing habitat fails the ecosystem in various ways and for various reasons that I've described at length in the book. In this case, However, there is one particularly salient reason, which is the concentration of market power caused by the consolidation of intermediaries such as insurers and PBMs. This factor is amplified by others in the pricing, value and competition habitats, but this single factor is the most important issue influencing the working of the pricing habitat. As a result, the pricing habitat doesn't maintain the three balances that it is supposed to, meaning that the ecosystem can't deliver the affordable, innovative medicines that we ask of it. Obviously strongly associated with the pricing habitat is the competition habitat, which is the home of both innovative manufacturers and imitative manufacturers like generics and biosimilar companies. But it also includes the regulators and the patent and competition authorities. The competition habitat's job is to balance two opposing forces. On the one hand, the restraints on competition, such as patents and regulatory exclusivity, to provide incentives to innovators to develop the drugs that society values. On the other, the conditions that enable imitators to make generics and biosimilars. It must do this in a way that allows sufficient risk-adjusted return on investment so that investors invest in innovation, but at the same time allowing price competition to operate as soon as and as effectively as possible. And it must maintain this balance in a predictable way that is difficult to game or manipulate, because uncertainty about competition and when it ends or when it begins increases the cost of capital and deters investment by both innovators and imitators. At present, the competition habitat fails the ecosystem in numerous ways and for numerous reasons, again described in the book. The most salient of these is that neither patents nor regulatory exclusivity are very good at differentiating between innovations with different levels of value to society. But the competition habitat is also one where many different factors interplay, and it's susceptible to manipulation and to political influence. This means that the competition habitat can't provide what the ecosystem needs if it is to provide an economically sustainable supply of affordable, innovative medicines. If we want the ecosystem to do that, we'll need to make the competition habitat both more discerning and more predictable. The last of the 7 habitats bridges both supply and demand sides of the market. The patient habitat is the home of patients and their proxies, such as employers and government agencies like CMS, but also patient groups. For the ecosystem to work well, the patient habitat must do 2 things. It must understand and prioritise what society values, not only clinically but also economically and ethically. And it must communicate those values to the rest of the ecosystem in the many varied ways it encourages innovation and enables imitation, such as NIH investment and exclusivity conditions. At present, the patient habitat doesn't give the ecosystem what it needs to deliver what we want from it. Partly this is because it relies on market forces to communicate what society values, but the market is very imperfect. Partly it's because we don't have the systems to understand and prioritise what society most needs from pharmaceutical innovation. And partly it's because the patient habitat doesn't communicate its non-clinical needs, such as its health economic needs and its ethical expectations. For these reasons, the patient habitat hinders the ecosystem from providing the medicines we want sustainably and affordably. So again, let me pause for a moment to summarise the last 4 slides which covered the demand side of the market. The cost of drugs, what they cost to make, is largely a function of the supply side, the interaction of the discovery, innovation and coalition habitats. But the price of drugs, what we have to pay for them, is largely a function of the demand side, and especially the value pricing and competition habitats. The patient habitat bridges both supply and demand sides. If we want affordable, innovative medicines on an economically sustainable basis, we need the supply side to be more effective and efficient. But we also need the demand side habitats to make their specific contributions to the ecosystem. But as with the supply side, each of the demand side habitats has multiple weaknesses that mean that they fail to fully meet the needs of the ecosystem. I've mentioned some of these, but others are listed in this slide and I've discussed them at length in the book. In other words, though, even if the supply side was perfect, which it isn't, the problems of the demand side would still mean that the ecosystem is unlikely to be able to provide what we ask of it, namely an economically sustainable supply of affordable, innovative new medicines. So that's my diagnosis of the issues facing the ecosystem and its 7 habitats. So in my remaining few minutes, I'm going to talk about possible therapies. But first, it's important to remember that these issues concern a small minority of prescriptions, but the vast majority of money spent on medicines. The issue of a small number of drugs at much higher prices has been amplified as pharmaceutical innovation has shifted from small molecule drugs to biologics and from primary care to specialty. It's likely this issue will get worse as advanced new therapies such as cell and gene therapies become common. And this trend will be a little bit like our unhappy couple falling on hard times. It will put strain on the marriage and increase the risk of the social contract breaking down. So in the last part of the chapter and in the final part of the book, I talk about what can be done to manage the ecosystem so that it gives us affordable, innovative medicines long into the future. If you've ever been a gardener, you'll know that a thriving garden takes a lot of work and involves many different tasks. The same applies in the pharmaceutical innovation ecosystem. And in any case, complexity science would warn us that simple single actions tend to have limited impact and may have unintended consequences. If we want the ecosystem to give us affordable, innovative new medicines, many different actions are needed right across the system. In New Drugs Fair Prices, I make 27 recommendations ranging from spending more on translational science to developing a code of shared cultural values, and from increasing the market power of patients and payers to reshaping the regulatory exclusivity system to reflect society's economic and health needs. But these 27 things are interconnected. They can't be individually cherry-picked. We have to do them all, just as a gardener has to water, feed, weed and do many other things. Now obviously there isn't time to go through these 27 things in this presentation, and I do talk about them in detail in my book. But there is a connectivity and a synergy between these 27 actions that mean they fall naturally into 3 groups, 3 big projects. First, a project to make pharmaceutical innovation less costly, more relevant to society's needs, and so more valuable. This would involve work on the 3 habitats on the supply side of the ecosystem. Second, a project to assess the value of new medicines in a way that reflects the real world needs of different parts of society. This would mainly involve work in the value habitat, but also in the innovation and pricing habitats. And thirdly, a project to make the pharmaceuticals market work more like other markets so that the most valuable innovation is encouraged and the most valuable imitation is enabled. This would involve work especially in the competition and pricing habitats, but also in the patient habitat. If we want a sustainable supply of innovative and affordable new medicines, we need to do all 3 of these projects. And importantly, no single actor or even group of actors is able to do these on their own. These are not government projects or industry projects, these are societal projects. So to conclude, let me leave you with the 3 things I would like you to remember about my session today. First, pharmaceutical innovation is important and valuable, and it is built on a relationship between the industry and society. That relationship has always had its issues, but for various reasons it's now in danger of unravelling. Society could clumsily restrict the support that it gives that makes pharmaceutical innovation possible, and the industry could retreat into innovation that meets only the needs of their shareholders rather than that of society. So perhaps the first thing we need to remember is that our goal is not to win the argument about who is right, but simply to stay married. The second thing I'd like you to remember is that although couples tend to argue about specific issues, those issues are less important than the deeper issues which underlie them. In the same way, arguing about specific issues around drug pricing is a distraction from the more systemic understanding of the issues in the ecosystem. So it's important to remember that we need to focus on making the relationship as a whole valuable to both sides. And the third thing to remember is that relationships take a lot of work by both sides and it's never finished. We're not going to fix the pricing of innovative drugs in a day. It's going to take a lot of work over time across many different areas, as summarised in this figure. It must involve everyone concerned. It will require goodwill and a willingness to change. So the third thing I'd like you to remember is that while specific measures such as price negotiation or investment in research might be part of the answer, they're very unlikely to be the whole answer. So thanks for your attention to this presentation and for your interest in new drugs, fair prices. I'll be delighted to hear your comments, your questions and your feedback. If you'd like to set up a call, just send me an email. You can find the book anywhere that you buy books, including on Amazon. And if you'd like a sample chapter PDF again, just send me an email. I hope you enjoy the book.